Kia ora everybody. Kia ora and welcome to today's talk on the art of New Zealand. I imagine you are here today because you are perhaps lovers of art and you'd like to know more. Well, I'm very happy to share with you the art of New Zealand. And New Zealand art has a rich cultural history and a vibrant contemporary mix. In the middle here we've got Cass by Rita Angus. This is in the regionalist style and it came to really represent New Zealand in the mid-20th century. Quite an iconic image. On the right-hand side we've got Ralph Hatiri. Now he's a leading Maori sculptor and this vigorous carving defines his style. It's called Black Phoenix and it's from 1966. On the left-hand side, we've got an image of Maori women. They are weaving, and it's by an artist called Gottfried Lindau. But more on that later. So these are three signposts to New Zealand art. So let's begin our artistic journey. And we'll begin with a canoe. Now, canoes feature strongly in the early European art. They're also key cultural symbols of spiritual and artistic significance to the Maori. Ancient canoes are remembered with veneration. Here on the left we have Augustus Earle's watercolour, Meeting of the Artists and Hongi at the Bay of Islands, 1827. Earle was the first significant English artist to stay, remaining for about a year. He was in this Bay of Islands region under the patronage of a Maori chief, Te Wahemu. This was why he was able to produce a large number of watercolours and drawings of the Maori daily life and culture. On the right, an earlier and much reproduced image from 1769 by Herman Dietrich Sporing. Now he was a Finnish botanist on James Cook's first voyage on the Pacific, and it's now in the British Museum. He was a naturalist, not the official artist. The artist was Sydney Parkinson, but more on him shortly. It's titled Crew Bidding Defiance to the Ship's Company, and you can see the welcome was not always friendly. And here we have the very first image, and again the canoe. 1642 saw the first European visit, Abel Tasman from the Dutch East India Company. This is the first depiction of Maori from a European perspective. And it shows a famous incident of warriors in canoes attacking the cockboat of the Zihan. This was the day after the Maoris had been fired on by Tasman's crew. 4 Dutchmen were killed. Tasman called it Murderer's Bay. You see the writing on the image. The image contains the whole story, what happened, where it happened, the coastline, even the depth of water the boats were anchored in. After sailing away, Tasman drew a ragged line on the map, which some later claimed to be the Great South Land. But this artist was really like the foreign correspondent of the day. This is Golden Bay today, once called Murderer's Bay. They changed the name, a much more appropriate reflection of its inherent beauty. Ancient Maori also left their marks. The oldest rock art in New Zealand is found in limestone outcrops along the centre of the South Island, stretching from Kaikoura to North Otago. There you can find dozens of rock clefts, and you'll see images of drawings of birds, dogs, fish, people, and unusual beasts. Opie here on the right is the source of one of the most reproduced works in New Zealand art from the 1960s, the Opi Tanawa. From 1960 to 67, it graced the New Zealand 2-shilling stamp, and then until 1970, the 20-cent stamp. Now, carving holds an important place in Maori culture. Carving on wood, on bone, and greenstone is popular. It functions both as an art form and as an historic record. Each line and shape has meaning. Each design connects the physical with the mana. The mana is inside and is a spiritual power. Wood carvers were believed to be in contact with the spirit world. The tiki represents the first man. The ceremonial houses, meeting houses, war canoes, they are all objects of carving. The canoe can be very decorative with the carved human figures, defiant stances, protruding tongues, and weapons to ward off intruders. The canoe builder and the wood carver were highly skilled. Men worked with the hard materials of bone, wood, and stone. Skilled carvers were in high demand, and they often went beyond their communities to neighbours to work there for some time while they were completing carvings. Payments would be bartered as there was no monetary system. The marae are their meeting houses and solid structures. They demonstrate the Maori practice of designing objects to imbue them with the spirits of ancestors. Some are also adorned with carved human figures. The reddish-brown colour seen on the photo on the left is a very common colour, which is held in high esteem in Polynesia. All the Polynesian islands use this. The chief's house symbolises the body of the ancestor, the ridge, his spine, the rafters, you can imagine, and the community life is centred around it. To achieve the colour red, ochre was ground up into a powder and mixed in a shark or whale oil-based paint for adorning the carvings. This custom has been continued with modern similar colours and paint today. Now, the women's roles in craft art complemented the men. They worked with soft materials, flax fibre, making masks, costumes, cloaks, and plaiting ornaments. They made basketry. They worked together. There were no individual struggling artists. The example on the left is a tanika-type cloth used for cloaks. The fibre is naturally bleached and then worked with coloured threads. The chiefs wore the best of precious cloaks and the jade. These are from the collection of the National Museum of New Zealand. Personal adornments include garments, pendants, ornaments, tattoos, and the objects that were carried. Now, the moa, the extinct bird which was hunted by the early immigrants as a ready food source, made a very valuable necklace. The ancient bone seen here cannot be replicated today. So these were the traditional Maori arts. They did not work in the visual art in a Western style until more recently. This was a happier encounter when the French also visited New Zealand. This early image, captured by de Sanson, is from Dumont d'Urville's voyage in the late 1820s. The French also travelled with artists on the explorer ships. De Sanson trained as a topographic draftsman before joining the voyage. This depicts an event that happened in Tolaga Bay in the North Island, just one of the many encounters between the French and Indigenous people. So we see de Sanson has depicted the important Maori practice of dancing. More colonists begin arriving in the mid-1800s. Joseph Jenner Merritt was born in England and he arrived in Auckland in 1841. He was going to work as a land surveyor. So he's not a major artist, but his work regularly comes up for auction. See the work on the right, and the war dance shows the influence of the Europeans, depicting Maori warriors dancing with an interesting mix of the Western muskets and the traditional Maori weapons. His drawings from his travels were retained by his travel companion. Merritt was an acute observer and is interesting in marrying a Maori woman in 1843, shown here, a Waikato woman. Their first child was born the same year. Under the patronage of Governor George Grey, he made drawings of the central North Island for 2 pictorial scrapbooks, which are now in the British Library. By 1852, he was in Wanganui, where he died in 1854. But living there for so long, he became known as a 19th century New Zealand artist. In the 19th century New Zealand, local painters were mostly amateurs. Their main aim was not to produce grand works of art, but to record information. Cultural practices of dancing were also observed by Edward Markham. This lovely small pencil and watercolour from Markham's journal is in the Alexander Turnbull Library, Auckland. Dancing and the haka is performance art and one of the most distinctive Maori cultural practices. The haka precedes games played by the national rugby team. Here you see contemporary dances as well as an historic photo from World War II haka in the Middle East. The women also dance together. Te Matatini is a large Maori arts festival. The guests enjoy nightly traditional Maori chanting, singing, dancing and hangi feasts. Meat and vegetables are cooked in the ground. So we see how important dancing is. Traditional art practice is also tattoos, moku. This is like carving or painting on the skin. Those of high rank wore facial tattoos, and they were recognised by these patterns rather than by the natural features other cultures might use to describe people. Maori life was influenced by the law of tapu. Tapu meaning forbidden to ordinary use or restricted. Across the Polynesian islands, the language retains similarities. Kapu in Hawaii, tapu in Tongan, and from tapu, James Cook introduced the word taboo to the Western world. Tomoko Māori tattoos carved in skin have symbolic meaning. For some, it's almost like a person's CV. Shows their family group, region, and status. Markings might commemorate important events. Artists use broad-toothed combs called yuhi, dipped in dark pigment. Initially, they were brought from eastern Polynesia, like a form of scarification on the skin. It's carved into the body with a tool, the yuki, which is filled with soot from burnt plants or, interestingly, caterpillars. It's covered with leaves to heal. Women's tattoos were, and still are, limited to an outline around the lips, and thin lines are drawn from the lips down to the chin. So it was taboo to wear an incorrect tattoo. Explorer art. Now, the artists are keen observers of people and places. Sydney Parkinson's head of the son of the Maori chief here shows the distinctive tattoos. Over Cook's 3 Pacific voyages, observations of Maori life were recorded and craft was collected. The first voyage to the Pacific, Sydney Parkinson travelled with James Cook, making this striking depiction. As he navigated, Cook records authentic Maori names on his charts as well. Like the South Island, Te Wai Panamu, the water of greenstone, refers to that island as the source of punamu, or nephritic jade, which is used in the green jade carving. William Hodges accompanied Cook's second voyage and also made many fine drawings and paintings after the voyage. John Webber was Cook's artist on the third voyage to the Pacific. Here he's shown the distinctive Polynesian triangle sails. With easy access to clean drinking water, Ship's Cove in the Queen Charlotte Sound, the top of the South Island, became a favourite resting place for Cook, to which he returned a number of times. It remains a pristine and beautiful area to visit today. This iconic image was completed as an oil painting after the voyage in London, and it's today in the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Around the last decade of the 19th century, the local art scene changed. Several professional artists from Europe arrived and contributed fresh ideas. Louis John Steele was a Frenchman who studied and worked in Europe before settling in Auckland, around 1886. He painted portraits like the one seen here and scenes from history. In 1898, he collaborated with Charles Goldie on the darkly academic The Arrival of the Maori in New Zealand. Now, this is an imagined history painting. Can anyone guess what it's based on? History painting plays an important genre in European art. Paintings depict key national events, like, for example, La Perouse receiving his instructions from the king, or Delacroix, the storming of the Bastille. This was based on a famous work by Jericho called The Raft of the Medusa from 1818. The arrival scene was, of course, all made up. This influential French work was painted by Jericho in the aftermath of a shipwreck in which the captain left the crew and passengers to die. It became a national scandal. So the artists would see work like this on display in the Louvre, they would study them, and they would try to emulate them. One of the key individuals to arrive was Gottfried Lindau. Now, he was a German bohemian, and he arrived in 1873. He painted magnificent Maori portraits, showing a proud and noble and defiant people. Here we have Ruhui Nagura, who's holding the dried skin of the hua bird, which is now extinct. On the right, Rangi Topira was one of two women chieftains to sign the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. She always proudly refused to wear European clothing, and she's seen here posing wearing the Taniko cloak and her jade ornaments. Lindau continued the European art practice of including important objects and ornaments in the portrait. These might symbolise something of cultural, personal value to the sitter. So these works are in the Wanganui Museum. As we move towards modern times, we'll look at a few key artists who have made a significant contribution. The first artist we'll look at is Frances Hodgkins. She is a staple of every major collection. Frances was born in Dunedin in 1869. Today, she's seen as one of New Zealand's most successful expatriate artists. The young Frances left in 1901 for Europe. She was travelling and painting widely there. Why? Well, because to escape local parochialism, artists with ambition wanted to travel to Europe and study the exciting modernist art movements. All the isms you've heard of, Impressionism, Fauvism, Post-Impressionism, Pointillism, Cubism. Such artists no longer sought to exactly represent or imitate reality. They believed that was the domain of that new medium, photography. Frances Hodgkins became well known for her still life work and her landscapes. In 1903, one of her watercolours became the first work by a New Zealander to be hung on the line, as they say, at the Royal Academy of Arts in London. So that meant being hung at eye level, not too high, not too low. It was a sought-after position because at the time the exhibition they filled the whole wall with art. So Hodgkins returned to New Zealand to see her family in 1903, and she established a teaching studio in Wellington. She only stayed for a few years. In 1906, she returned to London, where she had her first show at the Patterson Gallery in 1907. By 1910, she began teaching in Paris at Collarossi's Academy. She was the first woman instructor in the school, quite a significant achievement. Here she is painting in Concarneau in Brittany, which at the time had quite an artist colony living there. By World War I, she wisely left France and she retreated to Cornwall for the term of the war. After the war, Europe was moving more towards the modernism and the modernist approach, and as you can see here in her lovely blue barge watercolour, she's moving in that direction as well. But she was an experimentalist. She worked with several different styles as she spent many years working and travelling in Europe. Hodgkins became a leading figure in the British art scene. In 1929, as a member of the 7 and 5 Society, she exhibited with leading avant-garde artists such as Barbara Hepworth and Henry Moore. She was highly regarded by them. In 1939, she was invited to represent Britain at the Venice Biennale, but it was postponed due to World War II. By the time she died in 1947, Frances Hodgkins was recognised as one of Britain's leading artists and one of New Zealand's most famous exports. Now, the war artists traditionally have played an important role in the history of New Zealand, as they have in Australia. New Zealand's most successful engagement on the Western Front was this action at Lequesne in the last stages of the war. November 1918, and here it is depicted by George Edmund Butler, when the New Zealand Rifle Battalion scales the walls and captures the town. Liberate the town. World War II, we had Russell Clark as the official New Zealand war artist, and he witnessed war in the Pacific. He was an illustrator, a sculptor, and a university lecturer. He produced many sketches of battles that gave raw, honest depictions of struggles under fire. The New Zealand Book Awards for Children now include the Russell Clark Award for illustration. So from war artist, he became children's illustrator. After both world wars, the society was radically changed, and so were the arts. New Zealand painting changed with the understanding of modern art. Publications of art magazines and books increased, colour reproduction improved. International ideas were influenced by the new freedom to travel. There were touring exhibitions which were exposing people to more avant-garde ideas. However, New Zealand had conservative local tastes, and the touring exhibitions were not always received well. In the mid-1950s, this exhibition, such as Henry Moore's, as well as British abstract painting with avant-garde, they were both shown in New Zealand. And while he's now recognised as one of the 20th century's great sculptors, Moore's exhibition was not well received. Let's meet Rita Angus, an iconic New Zealand artist, mid-20th century. Her paintings are clear, hard-edged, sharply defined. Rita Angus helped introduce modernism to New Zealand. This was a time when some were interested in creating a more distinctly New Zealand style. But Angus herself was not necessarily interested in a national style. She was interested in her own style. In the 1930s and 40s, she painted scenes of Canterbury and Otago, and one of the most famous of these is Cass, 1936. She portrays the emptiness of the Canterbury landscape using simplified forms. She mostly uses unblended colours arranged in sections in a style reminiscent of poster art. Angus produced a remarkable body of drawings, watercolours and paintings. She was a feminist and a pacifist, and her work was deeply entwined with her view of the world. In her portraits and landscape paintings, she is displaying her flat, graphic style, distinctive, clear colours, and she creates a unique image of 20th century Aotearoa. In 2006, this picture, Cass, was voted New Zealand's most loved painting in a television poll. By the 1930s, Angus became more interested in portraiture, and she treated the figure as she did landscape. She evened it out, she emphasised features, and painted without expressive brushstrokes. She used the female figure as a way to express her philosophical ideas. She did 55 self-portraits. Perhaps a narcissist? In 1958, Angus won a New Zealand Arts Society fellowship, and she travelled to London to study at the Chelsea School of Art. She visited Scotland and Europe studying art. She returned home in 1960 to paint a mural at Napier's Girls' High School, which can now still be seen in the front of the school hall. The mural was commissioned to commemorate the girls who had died in the 1931 earthquake. Rutu is one of the many self-portraits produced by Angus. It's enigmatic, symbolic and compelling. Rutu bears a striking resemblance to the artist, but apparently in her letters to composer Douglas Lilburn, she revealed she regarded the painting as an imaginary portrait rather than a self-portrait. The white water lily is a cultural reference, an Egyptian motif, and homage to the ancient civilization she so much admired. In 2008, there was a major retrospective of her work at the Museum of New Zealand. Rita Angus, Life and Vision. Now you can see the similarity with some of the work of Rita Angus. Here, Doris Lusk. On the left, the tobacco fields, painted in 1943 during a holiday in Nelson. Lusk was a painter, a potter, an art teacher and a lecturer at the University of Canterbury School of Fine Art. She exhibited throughout her life. She was awarded the Governor-General's Art Award. Christchurch was the centre of this regionalist painting, with all the pupils and teachers at the Canterbury School of Art. Here, Doris Lusk is dealing with the themes of loneliness and isolation, crisp, clearly defined forms, and the stark contrast between light and dark. She uses flattened forms, strong outlines, and broad areas of colour. Colin McCann, the next significant New Zealand artist we will examine. While perhaps not to everyone's taste, he is today recognised as New Zealand's most famous contemporary painter. His work spans a period of 45 years. Perhaps he's best known for his landscape, his figurative work, and he abstracts it with the overlay of text and, at times, numbers. Colin McCann's religious concerns were paramount to him, and he was artistically influenced by the medieval artist Fra Angelico, who did many murals in monasteries to assist the monks. Large paintings, dark backgrounds, religious text in white. His work is semi-autobiographical, and he's reflecting what he's thinking and experiencing at any given point in time. It was reported McCann did his famous numbers painting titled Teaching Aids 2 after visiting a local primary school where he was dismayed at how mathematics were being taught. He did 3 sets of Teaching Aids paintings. They consisted of 10 panels acrylic on paper in 1975. Teaching Aids 2 was purchased in 2014 by the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney. No one understood Colin McCann in his day. He was an introspective loner. He used words like captions. He worked at the Auckland Art Gallery and taught art. He was also a printmaker and produced a number of lithographs in the 1950s, which can be seen in the Christchurch Art Gallery, where we're soon to go, Christchurch. Here's McCann's most significant work. In 1958, McCann and his wife visited the United States and used the visit as an opportunity to view art that interested them. They visited many galleries. On his return, the Northland panels reflect McCann's response to this visit. It accelerated his stylistic development, which continued through the following decade. There were significant changes in his work. Instead of using picture frames, he worked with unstretched and unframed canvas. Other changes included a large increase in scale. The creation of a series of works were in contrast to the individualised paintings. He had a new gestural freedom in large brushstrokes. These changes were apparent in the Northland panels, which are 8 large panels. In 1964, he started working as a lecturer at the University of Auckland. There was a major retrospective of his work at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam 2002, which introduced McCann as the first modern New Zealand painter of major international importance, and his home today in Auckland is now a small museum. After World War II, we saw a renaissance of Maori culture. Art played a meaningful role in the revival. The first exhibition of Maori modernism was held in Auckland in 1958. Maori artists began producing work to reflect cultural symbols. It can be seen as a synthesis of Maori and European art practice. Ralph Hatiri is regarded as one of New Zealand's most important contemporary artists. In 1961, he won a scholarship and studied at the Central School of Art and Design in London. From 1968, he began work for which he is best known, the Black paintings. Black Phoenix, seen here, is constructed of the burnt remains of a fishing boat. From the 1970s on, Hatiri was noted for his use of unusual tools. He used power tools to create his sculptures. His former studio was at the tip of Observation Point in Dunedin, overlooking Port Chalmers shipping terminal, where I believe we will dock. When the port's facilities were expanded, a section is now an award-winning sculpture garden. It's called the Hatiri Garden, featuring works by him and other modern Kiwi sculptors. Fatu Fu successfully created a contemporary pan-Polynesian art and is recognised as a father of modern Pacific art. Fa'u responded to his reality of living in Auckland, where interactions between the Pacific Islands merged to establish a vibrant local culture. It's a blend of creative endeavours, for many the soul of contemporary Pacific art. Fa'u uses frangipani motifs to offer the Pacific flavour. The first exhibition of Maori modernism was held in Auckland, 1958. Here, Fa'u's ceremonial masks, 1988, the poster for an exhibition of work. It asserts his Pacific strengths, illustrated with a mask image whose headdress shows various influences. With the growing recognition of the Pacific art, dealer galleries became interested in hosting Pacific exhibitions. There was debate between artists, and Maori artists became a cornerstone of the movement. Conserve for Tomorrow combines 3 painted canvases and 4 carved staffs on the right there. The staffs are composite images of chiefly staffs, warriors' clubs, and an orator's wish. They balance the 3 painted canvases which incorporate the frangipani, masks, and spirit bird symbols. There's a balance of male and female in relation to the motifs, as well as the art forms that are referenced. His use of the grid, the symbols, and the pattern on canvas, not barcloth, are reinterpreting the cultural icons. He searches for a balance between men and women, life and death, past and present. Fu'u creates sculpture that draws upon the Polynesian focus on the head. The head is the seat of one's mana. Tangaloa, a 3-dimensional rendition of Fu'u's mask motifs, asserts the presence and power associated with men, with chiefs, with orators. Now, Johnny Lyle on the right and his son, Johnny Peninsula, are father and son working together on the Tusi Falau exhibition. Johnny Peninsula was born in Samoa. He grew up there, settling in Southland when he came to New Zealand at the age of 21. He was one of the first Pacific painters to exhibit in New Zealand. His first show was 1972. Lyle Peninsula created his own niche based on his cultural heritage and contemporary Indigenous art practice. His father and son makes clear reference to the hybrid culture, urban Polynesian, proudly wearing his marker of identity, a tolima, a play between traditional and contemporary. Contemporary artists blend the traditional arts with non-traditional in crafting a range of objects. Nikki Hastings McCall combines the mother of pearl, sterling silver patterns, which are derivative of Fijian bark cloth. This combination reflects a modern set of valued items imbued with the identity. It incorporates bark cloth and tatau motifs as embellishment of her frangipani. She asserts the strength of the floral emblem, reflecting and symbolising the Pacific. Michael Tufuri pays homage to Samoan women in his hibiscus and mo'o. Utilising the hibiscus as a symbol, he adds to this with the reinterpretation of the upeti board, a board carved by men and used in the embellishment of bark cloth by women. So both sides of that artistic tradition are acknowledged. In this photographic parody, the artists are representing themselves to reinterpret stereotypes of the noble savage and the dusky maiden. Recreating the historic ethnographic photo, they dress in traditional manner to emulate the photos taken in Samoa in the 1890s that were sold for Western consumption. To counter the stereotype of the traditional Western gaze, these artists create a photograph filled with irony, a parody of the ethnographic study. The allure of the dusky maiden is a reference to the lai, and as such, it intermingles with the cultural politics of representation. On the one hand, reference to time past, on the other, a critique of a cliché. Now, Lisa Rihanna is in all major New Zealand collections. She's known for her pioneering moving image practice. In Pursuit of Venus Infected is a contemporary video work. It is her response to a very famous 1804 French wallpaper called Les Sauvages de la Mer Pacifique. It was produced by Joseph Dufour. In Dufour's original wallpaper, you see the widespread European fascination with late 18th century Pacific voyages, the same voyages undertaken by Captain Cook, Bougainville and La Perouse. 200 years later, Lisa Rihanna employs digital technologies to bring the scenic wallpaper to life and challenge its Eurocentric narrative. In Pursuit of Venus Infected creates beautifully realised new historical narratives, depicts Indigenous people who were absent from the original wallpaper. So this image really doesn't do it justice. It's a large video panorama, very, very exciting to see. It's enlivened with the sounds and dance and cultural ceremonies of the people. It's populated by people from across Aotearoa. It includes Australian Aboriginal people, people from the Pacific as well as Europe. This work has been displayed all around the world, including Te Papa Museum of New Zealand. I saw it at Goma in Brisbane in 2022, and her latest work is featured in the brand new Sydney Modern Museum at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. In 2018, then Prime Minister Jacinta Ardern proudly wore a traditional Maori cloak to meet the Queen and Prince Charles at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting at Windsor Castle. The event integrated Maori and Pakeha cultures and symbolises her cultural appreciation. It shows a living culture, what she wore on symbolic occasions. Together, all these elements have helped to develop a distinctive and successful cultural and artistic identity. So, we are going to Christchurch. There are some wonderful things to look forward to. And the Christchurch Art Gallery is on the corner of Worcester Boulevard and Montreal Street. The Maori name translates to wellspring of star-reflecting waters. In its collection, you will see a wonderful overview of Canterbury art. Here you can see Rita Angus, paintings and prints, and Frances Hodgkins. Other recent highlights include this work by Lisa Rihanna, Sex Trade, Gift for Banks, Dancing Lovers, Sextant Lesson. There are also a few surprising items there, including a Rodin statue. Now, the Dunedin Art Gallery is located in the Octagon, right in the centre of the city. Very easy to drop in for an hour or so. New Zealand art is important priority in this gallery. The earliest work dates from the 1860s to a comprehensive representation of contemporary New Zealand art. Occupying a special place in the collection is the work of Dunedin-born Frances Hodgkins. She was actually the daughter of William Matthew Hodgkins, the principal founder of the gallery and an artist in his own right. Other highlights there include major figures in Western art: Machiavelli, Claude Lorraine, Claude Monet, Pissarro, Reynolds, Gainsborough, even Turner. It's a surprisingly rich, diverse collection. So, New Zealand art. From the cultural to the contemporary, you can see the cultural was once very much contemporary, and the contemporary is very much cultural. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure sharing my love of art with you. I look forward to seeing you at my next talk. My next talk will be on the Anzacs, Brothers in Arms, and we'll see why Anzac Day was so important to us Aussies and Kiwis.